Kylian Mbappe could have never played football if he grew up in the U.S., in my opinion.
Being from the States, you have to learn how things are over there because MLS is much different than the Premier League, and you're almost stepping into a different realm.
With the 2026 World Cup coming here and a new generation of fans start to become to discover the game, there's no telling where the game's going to be 10, 15, 20 years.
One game changed my life, and that's all it ever takes.
A very special episode of Box to Box. I am very excited to be joined today by Brian Costin, aka ReformUSSoccer, and Marc, aka SimpleCoach, here today to debate Pro Rel. We've done a couple different episodes on the show up to this point already. If you haven't seen those, go check them out. They are on the channel live today. Regarding this very topic, this conversation, promotion, relegation, I think we're at this very interesting point when it comes to soccer in this country and in broader North America. And this debate, this question of whether or not America should be implementing an open system from top to bottom, one that it's laid upon the foundation of promotion and relegation. It's a topic that seems to be fairly divisive amongst the fan base, at least on the timeline. And that's why we're having this show today. I brought in these two gentlemen to debate the points, the broader points on whether or not promotion and relegation is the solution for what we feel this sport on this side of the world needs to grow to what we feel its heights truly should be. They're at the top of all sports in North America. So again, gentlemen, I thank you both for joining me today. I'm excited for it. How we're going to start the conversation today is kind of starting at the very bottom in terms of the foundation and working in additional points from there. So I want to focus first with Brian. You are kind of leading a charge, so to speak, with your own efforts around social change and how you'd like to see America embrace promotion and relegation. You are very pro-rel, so to speak. So we'll start with you. And I think the format for today, for the audience tuning in, we will give either side of the debate, right, either side of the argument, at least a few minutes to make their points, to answer the question. And then there will be counter arguments from there. I will let the conversation flow freely at that point. And I'll always kind of reel it back in to make sure we're able to move through the questions, through the talking points accordingly. All right, gentlemen. So let's go ahead and get started. Brian, let's start with you as the promotion relegation person here on the show today. Just the very baseline question of, first and foremost, for those who are not familiar, what is Pro Rel? How does it enhance competitiveness in soccer leagues across the world?
Well, first of all, thanks so much for having me on the show, Jose. And Paul, thanks for agreeing to do this debate. I hope it'll be a fun debate. But promotion and relegation, quite simply, is a process of sporting merit where what league you are in is dependent upon how well you do on the field. That is the most basic, simple format of it. There's different versions of it throughout the world. Let's talk about the Premier League. Every single year, 3 teams come up from the championship to the Premier League and 3 go down. One of the most exciting games in all of sport is that third position from the championship where they have a promotion playoff at the end of the season. And they get about 80,000 people a year in Wembley Stadium, all going crazy. Whoever is the winner of that game gets to move up to the top of the pyramid, and they also get about $180 to $200 million. It's considered the most valuable game in the world. But it means that every single game is important. That's the upside of promotion and relegation, is getting promoted. For every promotion, there is a relegation. So it's not utopia. Everyone doesn't always make it to the top, but it is a system which rewards teams for doing good and punishes teams for doing bad. And to me, that is the very essence of what sport should be, especially when you get to the professional stage. And we're not necessarily talking about development here, but when you get to the first team level and you're an adult, to have a system which embodies the principles of sporting merit, where your destiny is controlled by what you do, it really creates a system where every single club in the country has this orientation towards the top. At the beginning of the season, the record's 0-0. If you take care of business on the field, if you have good coaching, you have good players, you work on your facilities, you have the ability to move up that pyramid and have that dream of one day playing at the top of the pyramid. So it is the most inclusive form of the sport. On the other end of the spectrum, you have to pay $500 million to get to the top of the sport here in the United States of America, which makes it completely inaccessible to everyone except 0.1% of the population. And so promotion and relegation, along with other policies, are really what I think is going to take the United States from where we languish in 4th or 5th position in sports for team sports to really unlocking a whole new avenue of potential where every single community, every single club in America can have the belief and the pathway to dream to reaching the next level and the next level after that. And one day, if they do all the right things on and off the field, they will make it to the top of the pyramid and be able to compete against the best teams in the country and ultimately in the world. And so I think that if you have a mission like US Soccer does, and US Soccer's mission is to make the sport the preeminent sport in the country, you have to have a system that is inclusive of every single corner of America. We can't just compete in big cities. We can't just have it accessible to literally just the billionaires. We have to create a system that is going to give everyone hope, give everyone courage to try to step out of their shell and try to have that ambition to reach the next level. And I think that that's what's going to make the sport in America better over the next 10, 20, 100 years.
Thank you, Brian. That's a great introduction to this conversation. Paul, kicking it back over to you. I mean, he just kind of really broke down at a very high level what is ProRel, what the pros of that system, why everyone across the globe seems to be implementing it. Regardless of the history of this country and what we've seen so far, what league structures are most common to, the growing fan base today, are there challenges to the ProRel system that you've seen from your perspective, and what would those be?
Yeah. So, first of all, thank you. Thanks for having me on, Jose. This is fantastic, Brian. And admire what you're doing, even though we don't necessarily see eye to eye. Let me stipulate right from the outset. I agree with everything that Brian has just outlined. I agree with it. I agree the most exciting game is the survival games of the EPL. Some of the most compelling stories that you watch in the soccer world. But that's England, right? That's different context, different culture, different all of that. And so what I look at when I say, okay, is can we do something here in the United States? I have yet to hear a compelling way in which we can implement promotion and relegation. Now, could it work theoretically with MLS, those 30 MLS or 29, soon to be 30 MLS teams? Sure, I think you could come up with something. Could there be some sort of hybrid model of 40 teams? Sure, I think you could come up with something. But to me, just looking at his history as a guide over the last 100 and some odd years, the notion that somebody can create a team, I always get beat up for my choice of places. So I'm going to get beat up by Alliance, Ohio, where I went to school. Alliance, Ohio can create a team and make its way up through this ladder to play an MLS team or that first division is not convincing. It's not something that can happen. Why do I know this? Because I know, just like a vast majority of the teams that get created, they don't have the fans there. So when you're talking about a sport that 85% of a team's revenue is wholly reliant upon fans to come, when you don't have that, when you don't show that at any point in the past, to think that it somehow is going to change because you have this concept of, hey, if you win, you're going to be able to promote it. I just don't, again, I'm happy to be wrong on this, but I just don't see, there's no one has been able to give me something that I could hold on to actually believe that. So it's not that I don't think promotion and relegation would be great, but, and I'm going to say this, I'm going to beat up over it, but unfortunately, in the modern game today, 21st century United States, I think promotion and relegation is, beat me up for it, a relic of the past.
Well, is it right if I jump in?
Yeah, I would say go ahead and jump in, Brian, whenever you see fit.
So if you look at the United States and our 100-year plus history of soccer here, what we're really talking about is 100 plus years of closed soccer. the question is, what do we think is the system that grows the culture? So you pointed out that we don't have the soccer culture, we don't have the soccer support to help allow such a system to exist. But what if it's actually the other way around? What if it's because we don't have the traditional methods to grow a soccer culture like has been successful in over 100 countries across the world, side by side with promotion and relegation, 100 countries that soccer is the number one sport in those countries? Maybe it's the system that is holding back our country in popularizing the sport. So I think that that's something that has to be considered. And so let's say we were starting from scratch right now in America, and we were saying, we just invented soccer in the United States for the first time. It just reached our shores. What would be the system that we would look to as the proven system that has grown the soccer to number one in over 100 countries across the globe? Is it a closed soccer model, or is it an open soccer model with promotion and relegation? And I would say that the closed soccer model is the one that is antiquated, as evidenced by the last 30 years of experience in the United States of America. We have the most chaotic pyramid in the entire world, the most unsuccessful pyramid in the entire world. When you talk about the number of professional teams that have failed over the last 30 years, it's over 160 teams that have completely failed. And so if we're looking at this from a neutral observer perspective, and we're an alien from outer space, and we were trying to decide which system is the better system to make soccer be expressed in every single corner of the country and make it popular, I would say that the overwhelming amount of evidence is that the open system works and the closed system doesn't work. Now, I'm sure we can go into that a lot further about why Major League Soccer is the most successful league in our nation's history. But in reality, we should look beyond just Major League Soccer and look at the entirety of the pyramid and why we're not achieving the success that hundreds of other countries are experiencing.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think, it leads to a point that, we tweeted about this debate heading into the conversation today. And, I think there were some that even referenced, like, how do we know, kind of like what Paul alluded to, right? How do we know a culture even exists in some of these markets that we would ideally be expanding into through opportunities that are created by ProRel? I don't know if there's a fair way to even answer that question. I think it would have to be an experiment of some kind just to see how much fandom could be created through prioritizing smaller markets as opposed to the big ones that have been prioritized through franchising with Major League Soccer. But I still think the bigger question is, and this is one that I think I might want to start with Brian and work back to Paul, would be from a ProRel perspective, I imagine that we would have to entertain this conversation without Major League Soccer, simply because I just don't envision a world where these high net worth individuals would be okay with the idea of their investment dipping in valuation, or their valuation being cut by a major percentage simply because of relegation now being an opportunity for smaller markets and smaller clubs to rise up. So let me just ask you this, Brian, and we'll kind of work off of it back and forth. Is promotion and relegation even remotely a possibility, let's say, without Major League Soccer? And how could that be?
I think it's a major possibility both with Major League Soccer and without Major League Soccer. And I believe that the mechanisms are there to make this change. One, I think we have to recognize Major League Soccer decided instead of doing what the other four major pro leagues did in the United States of America, they decided that they were going to join the association soccer pyramid. They didn't decide to do their own. They could have gone the NFL route, the MLB route, the NHL route, the NBA route. They decided to join the association soccer pyramid because they realized that there are enormous benefits from joining the association soccer pyramid, a soccer pyramid that has been built on the backbone of sporting merit, solidarity, and promotion and relegation. And so they recognize that there is value in that system because, hey, look, if US Soccer decides to implement promotion and relegation, Major League Soccer can either say, okay, we'll join that, we'll be a participant in the association soccer pyramid, or they can say, bye, we're leaving, we're going to go do our own thing. I actually don't think that they would leave underneath that scenario because of the massive benefits that they have enjoyed and are enjoying because of the association soccer pyramid. Let's start with the contract that they had with US Soccer. They had over $1 billion worth of contracts for TV, joint contract with US Soccer. They have a joint contract with CONCACAF. They have joint contracts with Liga MX. They have exclusive access to the CONCACAF Competition Leagues Cup. They have enormous benefits, and that's not even getting into solidarity and other things like that they receive from FIFA, US Soccer, the World Cup helping seed Major League Soccer in the first place. There's been enormous benefits that have come from the Association Soccer Pyramid to Major League Soccer. And so I think that recognition that there is value in the Association Soccer Pyramid is something that I don't think that Major League Soccer would want to do without. They see the value in it. And if there were changes that were made through the elected body of the AGM, which Major League Soccer only controls 10% of the vote, that I think that they would come alongside everyone and say, okay, we see that there's more benefits in being in the pyramid than being outside of it and independent.
That's a good point. And just to piggyback on that before I switch it over to Paul, because I'm really kind of curious. There's a lot MLS is obviously receiving from it, but from the fans' perspective, regardless of the benefits, so could we essentially split Major League Soccer away from association soccer here in the United States and have that other side of the pyramid be successful when it comes to viewership, when it comes to buy-in, when it comes to the culture we want to create, all of those factors that I think fans are really weighing into this conversation pretty heavily. Could that side of the pyramid be successful, be considered successful without Major League Soccer?
Yeah. So right now, as the rules exist, that alternative pyramid could not exist. There is no mechanism within professional league standards that allow a team to get promoted, say, from the 4th tier to the 3rd tier or the 3rd tier to the 2nd tier. All of the basis of what league you should be in is based on economic factors. Do you have an owner that has a net worth of over 10, 20, or $40 million? But in reality, when we're talking about Major League Soccer, it's now, do you have an owner with a net worth of over $500 million, over $1 billion? So if I think that's another really important thing, is that we've spent all this time and money in the United States establishing and subsidizing the closed system. We do not have the rules that would allow an open system to exist. So not only are we not equally subsidizing the open system with promotion and relegation, it's in effect illegal underneath US Soccer's rules. So there would have to be additional changes made that would enable a separate pro-rel system to exist in the United States. And it's possible that that system, if it were enacted, I think it would have a breadth of clubs from all over the country that would be interested in participating in that, especially a lot of the nonprofit clubs that are completely locked out of our current system. It would take a lot of time, but I think eventually it would start competing and eventually surpass Major League Soccer, because I do think that there's a ceiling on Major League Soccer based on its format right now.
Paul, how would you retort to that? I think that's a really interesting point, right? The idea that there is some ceiling on a closed system, that they can only get so big, even if you're able to attract the likes of Leo Messi and company and all of those friends he's brought over with him. Do you see a ceiling on the other side of the coin, right? The open system model that doesn't include the most successful league to date within broader US soccer?
This is one of the parts where I end up getting into arguments. I don't understand how you could be talking about promotion and relegation, how you could be talking about overhauling the system, US soccer, what have you, and talk about it by excluding one of two major, I'll just say, money centers that soccer has in the United States, right? There's two places where you can make money. One is through Major League Soccer, and then the other is youth soccer. That's it. There's no money in between. There's no real money happening in USL on down. If anything, they're break-even enterprises. Having said that, just a couple things. You know, if you take and I know Brian puts a lot of effort into it, and I actually took his murder pyramid, the 160 some odd clubs, and I took a look at every one of those clubs. 97 of those are because of bad business, are decided to get out of professional soccer. COVID impacted them. There's a litany of reasons. The rest of them were literally, and the only word I can say is irrelevant, right? They're created in towns, don't have any attendance, no way to pay the bills, they close down. That's just the reality. If you wanted to be serious about promotion and relegation, to totally break apart 100 years, right or wrong, 100 years of a closed system, I will concede, you're not going to get it by destroying everything that's been accomplished so far. And I would just turn you back to, go back to 1990 and experience soccer in 1990, and you will discover that for all of its problems, for all of its issues, the progress that has been made in the last 30 some odd years has been ginormous. Now, is there a ceiling? I don't know if any of us are smart enough to say that there's a ceiling to MLS. I'm being honest about that, right? Because from my vantage point, they were they shut down, they murdered 2 clubs in you know, 2 of the original clubs, Tampa Bay and Miami, right? So, and here we are with 29. They're actually making some money, and they have an actual business that's functional, right? What's the ceiling? I don't know if we're smart enough to say that. I don't know if we can say that they've reached a ceiling. I find it interesting, and Brian, I'm just taking your words, and I don't mean this as a cheap shot or anything like that, but right, you don't even watch the game, right? Like you don't even watch MLS. And so to make a judgment call that MLS has reached a ceiling when you said yourself with your interview with Jose that you don't follow MLS. And so I'm fine if you still think it's reached a ceiling, but again, I'm a fan, so I watch the game, and I love the game, and so that's what I focus in on. To say that it's reached a ceiling, having watched the league for 30 years, I just, maybe we're watching a different game. Like,
yeah. So the ceiling that I'm talking about is the market ceiling. None of the professional sports leagues exist in the vast majority of the country. So every single one of the franchises across all the 5 big sports, top tier, that still leaves 160 million people in America that do not have access to any local top tier sports. So the ceiling is the format of franchise soccer. There's never been a franchise soccer league that has clubs with an opportunity to make it to the top tier, because different than like minor league baseball and things like that. I think it's a structural difference, big time. But there is a structural limitation to the number of markets that Soccer United Marketing can get into, because they dilute, because every additional club that goes into the league, the chances of winning a championship go down and down and down. And I think that at some point, as we've learned the lesson from the other 4 big leagues, is that they've basically capped out at about 32 teams. And so the limiting factor, or the ceiling for Major League Soccer, is how do they ever get into the smaller markets that are needed in order to really supercharge soccer in the United States of America. I haven't found a compelling case. Like some people say Major League Soccer is going to maybe do internal promotion and relegation one day. I find that pretty fanciful. I don't see how, outside a separate body coming in and saying this is what you must do, that owners like San Diego FC paid a $500 million franchise fee. I don't think that they're going to accept that on their own and decide like they're gonna self relegate themselves without some type of government body jumping in. And then going back to the 2 successful things that you've seen in American soccer so far, Major League Soccer and youth soccer. Well, I think that our professional league standards have bifurcated the system, where I don't know of any club that came into existence, at least in the last 20 years, where they were already a member of their community. They all were kind of plopped in when someone paid a huge franchise fee in order to get. So San Diego FC being an example, do they have youth leagues? Have they participated in soccer, and have they built up over time? No, their entire history is a $500 million check. And so I think that really separates youth soccer from the beginnings of new professional sports leagues. Now, Major League Soccer, and to their credit, one of the best policies that they have done and has done great things for soccer in America is their free academies. But it wasn't something that was built up before they got into it. So you're literally talking about more than 10,000 clubs in America that really don't have that ability to move up the pyramid and become a big soccer club and compete on that level. So I think that the way that we've structured it in America is a way that there is the ability in an open system to start from the very bottom and work your way up over time by developing players and building a club that starts being successful at the youth ranks, and then eventually gets to the point where their first team does damage, and then they start moving up the pyramid that way. So I think that the limitations are, maybe they weren't intended that way when we decided our professional league standards and how we set it up, but some of that I really see as a direct consequence of our culture consequences are a direct result of the policies that have been put in place by U.S. Soccer.
To me, again, just based on what I know from what I hear, right? Like, you're willing to set professional soccer back 100 years if you're okay with letting MLS go its own way, which it cannot, right? It can't go its own way.
Why not?
Why can't it go its own way? Because soccer players to be selected for national teams have to be part of recognized clubs. They can't sit outside the infrastructure that is the federation or that is FIFA rules. So there's gonna be candidates that, hey, I want to play in the United States, that will not play anymore. Again, we're talking economics, because their likelihood that they get called into the national team is in jeopardy. Right? That's probably one of the big ones. The second one, I think, has something to do with referees and whatnot. But sanctioned leagues will get referees. So I think those are two fundamental ones that I think are often overlooked. So MLS really can't go its own way. Second, or the third, I'm not sure you want the federation and MLS to part ways, because in your own model that you suggest for promotion and relegation, you need somebody with deep pockets to fund all the other clubs down below, downstream, right? I mean, that's what solidarity payments are. That's what parachute payments are for.
Well, they don't participate in that system. They want all the benefits.
No. But my point is that in a fully functioning open system that you advocate for, and you talked about it before about solidarity, and I don't think you mentioned it here today, about parachute payments for clubs that get relegated, you have to have a source of income for that. And where's that going to come from? And the only place that is likely to come from in any meaningful way is if Major League Soccer or youth soccer in general comes up with the funds to do that. Because if you remove MLS from the federation is not going to make nearly as much money as it has in the past. And I think that's an unfortunate reality, economic reality, that I don't think you're coming to grips with. So you remove the ability of a system to stay at least economically viable, right? And why is it? I think it's worthwhile going back 100 years why promotion and relegation worked the way it did. And that's because back in the day when they were emerging leagues in England and in Spain, and most of them were amateur teams where there was not real money on the line, right? And so here you're talking about a system in the confines of the United States where, yes, you have somebody who paid $500 million for a franchise, and you're going to tell them now, first of all, now you're outside of the federation. But if we go with promotion and relegation, well, you're also going to have to come up with $30 million or whatever, so we can distribute to all of these other teams. And then lastly, I hear what you say about the markets. I find that actually probably the most compelling part of everything you talk about from the promotion relegation part is how do you get to these markets that are, we'll just call them underserved, right? That they're not soccer markets. I totally agree with you. I find that really, really interesting. But I'm just looking at your list that I pilfered and stole, and happily send you the spreadsheets, by the way, that I come up with figuring this stuff out. Boca Raton Sabres, Central California Valley Hydria, I don't know them, Columbia Heat, Delaware Wizards, Detroit Wheels, Hawaii Tsunami, Hershey Wildcats, Indiana Blast, Jersey Dragons, Lansing Ignite. These are all markets that are underserved and had teams that, right? Nobody recognizes those names, maybe outside of a handful of people, because they're no longer in existence, and they were in the places where you wanted them to be. And so I just look at this. I just look at the data that comes out, and I just say, well, something else has to happen. And that's why I said in the original interview I did with Jose, was like, fundamentally it's a fraud, because what you have to do is you have to prop up these teams over a period of time by taking money from somewhere else, MLS, or the US Soccer, and subsidize these teams to survive until they're at a point that they're better. That to me is a hopeful strategy, and hope is not a really good strategy.
This is exactly the strategy that was used to prop up Major League Soccer. So you're saying that all of the benefits that Major League Soccer received from US Soccer, from FIFA, from all of the things that they've been from state and local governments, they are the most propped up league in the world, I would argue. And so you're saying that the structure of solidarity, the structure of promotion and relegation that's given hope and opportunity to hundreds of thousands of communities across the world is somehow invalid here. Those clubs that died, the vast majority, except for 3 of the clubs, they never had a pathway to have the same principles that have worked the world over. They never had a pathway to the top tier of the sport. So it's a double standard, saying that we would have to prop up the sport using these principles, and then saying that Major League Soccer
But
would have to do the propping
it's not
up.
just principles. It's money, right?
Yeah,
it's not
money.
It's
And
money.
so-
Okay,
So
I'm
maybe-
sorry to interrupt. Go ahead, Brian. Keep going. I apologize. I didn't
It's
mean to
okay.
interrupt.
It's getting good. It's getting
Yeah,
good.
yeah.
I actually like this back and forth. It's okay. It's okay
Come
to
on.
disagree.
Let's
It's
go,
okay to
baby.
disagree.
But I think it's a good point, though, and I think it's a question that we each need to outright answer, right? How does pro-rel affect the sustainability and the long-term, I would say, sustainability and stability of soccer clubs, especially in the smaller markets, regardless of the double standard or anything else in Major League Soccer? What would have to happen long-term for these smaller markets to survive in a world with pro-rel?
Well, I think ultimately the sustainability of the pyramid comes down to the fans, and what do the fans enjoy, because they are the economic lifeblood of the pyramid, for the ultimate sustainability of the pyramid. And so we should be devising a pyramid that creates more enjoyment, more storylines, more hope, more opportunity. And then on the flip side, more sadness and heartbreak that makes you even a more diehard fan. I think that the thing is that we should be structuring our system in a way which gives the most amount of entertainment value to the fan, because that will cause the fan to spend more money overall. And I also think that we should think about it. We should not think about it about the individual club that gets promoted or the individual club that gets relegated. I think we all kind of accept that the club going up is going to experience an economic windfall, and the club falling down is going to experience pain. But what we should be doing is looking at it from the macro level, is what is the sporting structure that derives the most amount of entertainment value for the fans? And I think we should ask ourselves that question at the end of the season, when your team no longer has anything to play for. And, in some markets, you get the paper bags over the heads. You get people staying away. You have empty seats galore. I think it's absolutely clear that promotion and relegation, a lot of the value and benefit is to those lower league clubs that now have the dream of moving up. It makes every single win and loss vastly more consequential. there is downside for teams that get relegated. I can't get around that at all. But I think when we look at it from the macro perspective, how do we give the most amount of communities hope and opportunity and storylines and entertainment that is radically different from the boring storylines in the other sports when it comes to the professional levels? It's a whole new level. It's a whole new ballgame. And I think that fan interest is really going to be the thing that drives the sport forward here in America, like it has done in the rest of the world.
I would just add, sorry, Jose, I know you were looking. I just don't. You said it, the fans, and this pains me to say, I just don't see where those fans emerge from, even if we had the compelling stories. And I'm going to point you into one place where, again, modern times, right? So modern times, let's implement promotion and relegation, because the model that was used back at the turn of the century, the 20th century, right, where everyone was an amateur and they're emerging leagues and they're doing all these things, is not the world we live in today. And so what would promotion and relegation look like? We have one example where it went horribly wrong, and that's in Australia in the 1980s, right? They instituted promotion and relegation, and at some point, I think it was 1983, a report came out that they had commissioned somebody and had said, again, like, this is devastating the sport of soccer in Australia, and recommended that they suspend promotion and relegation and to build a national league for all of Australia that would effectively be closed, so that you could manage it properly and you could have the right, we'll just say, the right type of investors and the right clubs, and you can sort of be a little bit more discriminate. And they ignored that. They ignored that recommendation until, I think it was the late 90s. And I might misspeak on the actual timeframes, but and so now they're at the A League with 12 teams, right? And it probably represents, not exactly, but it probably represents more of the experience that we have here in the United States when it comes to soccer, than if we look to what happens in Europe or South America, right? Like those were levers that were pulled 100 years ago. Australia pulled it 30, 40 years ago, whatever it was, and it had disastrous consequences for them. Right? And again, I prove me wrong. I would also add the other thing that I don't think we talk enough about, which is a very valid discussion to have. We don't have, I'll just say, the governmental, is that a word? Governmental, political, or cultural infrastructure to support the sport as it is, right? Like, if, let's just say something happens to MLS, some big scandal, whatever, we don't have an agency that would come in and fix it for everybody. And then a year later, MLS is off and functioning like they do in England when a team goes bad, right? If MLS goes sour, MLS goes sour. We can't expect anyone to come to the rescue, right? There's only one sport that I know of in the United States that has anything remotely close to that, and that's not really, would be Major League Baseball, right? That there is that, whatever the Congress does to manage that. But everywhere else you go, particularly Europe, I don't think so much in South America, but in Europe, everyone has an external entity that can manage situations within the sport that get beyond the sport. So if there's a club that is in bankruptcy, yeah, there's administration, there's different things that get managed. We don't have that, right or wrong, right? So as sad as the names that I listed out that went sour, that went south and closed their doors, they closed their doors because hey, you didn't make money. Tough. Right. And I worry if we were to implement and get promotion and relegation, my concern would be how long before we have this functioning pyramid that there's a top division to all the way down to the lower division. Anybody who has a team could go through. And how long does that take? Right? Because again, some teams lasted a year, 2 years, 3 years. Like, is that going to take, or are we talking decades? Right? Like, and again, I just go back to hope is not a good strategy. I think a lot of the things you talk about are hopeful, and I love it. Don't get me wrong, I'm a culture guy, so I totally get it. But to me, where the rubber hits the road is the actual implementation. How do you make it successful and not kill thousands of clubs that pop up and down because
and Brian, that's a great point. And I think it leads to the bigger question of how, if you and your task force, let's call them that, right? This new social change organization that you're in the process of creating, if you were tasked with the opportunity to advise on the implementation of ProRel and how we could go about it, how long it's going to take, what the financial risks really are, and more importantly, how to mitigate them, because this doesn't affect just the fans, right? It's legitimately the clubs, the broadcasters, the sponsors. They're all going to want a layer of stability to get to have some kind of guarantee to make sure that their dollars are well spent. Especially when you're talking about a sport that is maybe top 5 on this side of the world, as opposed to being the #1 preeminent sport. What advice would you give? And I think as tactical as you can really kind of make it for the audience, the better.
Yeah, that's an amazing question, Jose. And it's really a very enormously important question. If you look around the world at the places where soccer is #1, they have a promotion and relegation system. How did those systems get their start? They got started by nonprofit associations like US Soccer, who established the framework for that. And I would say there needs to be a solidarity mechanism from US Soccer, even before we ask Major League Soccer to start engaging in solidarity with the pyramid. I would take kind of the best practices from around the world, where essentially you get about 15% of the TV and sponsorship money from the top tier, and you make that go down the pyramid. I would propose that US Soccer do the same. And one thing, going back just really quick, is like what has happened since US Soccer has left the Major League Soccer contract. It isn't been a disaster. It has been actually the opposite. They've basically doubled the amount of money that they're bringing into US Soccer from the TV and sponsorship deals after they left Major League Soccer. But I think that really, and also this, I would vastly, vastly prefer an open system with Major League Soccer clubs included, because there is an enormous benefit to having everyone being included instead of people going off and doing their own thing. But I think that you need to have a solidarity system from FIFA, CONCACAF, and US Soccer to help create that. I propose that you use the proceeds of the 2026 World Cup or even the 2025 Club World Cup to help start open systems here in Canada, United States, and restart it in Mexico. Using the proceeds from that is going to be extremely, that's essentially one of the big things that they use to start Major League Soccer. So I think that's enormously important as well. But also maybe smaller decisions that can be made is stadium selections. I think last year, every single, except for 2, unless you count the Classico, Continental Classico as a friendly, all of them except for 1 in Hartford, Connecticut, was in an MLS stadium. We need to start diversifying where we're hosting men's national team games. And we have more infrastructure to do so than any other country on earth. We have more soccer capable infrastructure. Unfortunately, there are football lines painted on that infrastructure, but I think that that's a really big part of it as well. But I think that we got to really maybe start at the base. I like to take an example of the Milwaukee Bavarians, now called Milwaukee or Bavarians United. They are a team that have won 9 national championships, but they have a glass ceiling over their head. They're never going to be allowed underneath the current rules to move into the professional ranks unless they threw out their operating model and sold out to someone who wanted to purchase the rights to their image. We need to figure out how to get the Milwaukee Bavarians from ostensibly the 4th tier of US Soccer to the 3rd tier. So let's start thinking about the rule changes that we need to have a more inclusive soccer pyramid starting from the bottom. Like, let's say if there was a policy change at US Soccer that said, if you win one of these Division IV national championships, you get a permanent waiver into moving up into the third tier, as long as you continue to perform there. That would change things a lot and would allow for different business models and people with history and success on the field to start moving up. Maybe it's the bottom that we need to start thinking about. How do we move towards having more opportunity at the bottom? And then if that's successful, then maybe make it possible where if you win the championship at the third level, you can move up to the second tier, and so on and so on. So there is an unbelievable amount of different ways that we can start looking at making policy changes at US Soccer to allow for the beginnings of the implementation of an open system of promotion and relegation. Some are big things, some are small things. We can have a whole nother conversation about that. So I don't want to dominate this too much, but I think, those are some of the simple steps. Really, it's got to come from leadership at the top, starting with US Soccer, CONCACAF, and FIFA. They're really going to, I don't see a pathway to accomplishing it without those entities coming in and saying, this is the route we want to go.
And Paul, economically speaking, I mean, if you're hearing this advice and you're, let's say hypothetically part of this leadership council that has to decide whether or not this is a viable path, I mean, how much time do you give this realistically? I mean, I know from the business side, it's difficult to gauge at any type of question like this. But we think about where we've been with US Soccer, the success we've seen. How much roadway and runway ahead do you give for changes this big?
I would just say FIFA's the one that awarded the World Cup to Qatar after envelopes were exchanged. CONCACAF is no better, right? And so to actually go to them and ask them to, like, I don't see that. That's a lobbying effort of decades, right, to get them to a point. And I will agree with Brian, though, where I think if you really wanted to do this, and I think if you wanted to do it where it has a realistic chance of growing into place, right? Which is, hey, right now, and again, right or wrong, we could argue this. Right now, there is no real, anywhere in the United States, is there anything that any fan is accustomed to promotion and relegation, right? Like there's not that cultural element that we talk about in England and all these other places where it really matters. Where I think you could do something, and I think that to me would be the start, which is you return all your youth soccer clubs to the States, and there is no more of this regional league travel stuff unless there's competition issues, meaning there's not enough clubs in a particular state. Okay, maybe you regionalize it. And then you devise the system there. And you start with that. And you start to the U19s. It's promotion and relegation within your state. You win your state cup or whatever that league is, well, then maybe we do something broader and we start to expand that way. I think that's the greater likelihood. And it might, I think, tap into what I don't think we've tapped into, which is, we're largely, right or wrong, a youth soccer country. We're not a professional soccer country. We're not, like, the majority of dollars and focus is on the youth soccer element. So how do you tap into that? I think that's the way to tap into it. Without the tricks and mechanisms, I think, that you could do at Major League Soccer level and these different things.
So are you suggesting that youth soccer would be the perfect testing ground for?
Yes, I think, yeah. I think, and I think it would address a lot of issues, again, fundamental to the game. But yes, I think that would be, I think that's where I would personally, again, just start, because maybe it's just me, like FIFA, that's just too massive, right? That's too massive of a hill to climb. And I get, then people are into that. That to me is like, I like to see things happen, and things, I don't like to talk about things. I like to execute on them. That's my thing. So how do I execute them? The quickest way is, and that's where I think the Fed probably has the most influence, is at the youth soccer level.
I think there's a lot of merit to what you've said, Paul. And I think it's really, if we're going to be planting the seeds to build into the system, which I've been talking about here today, you really have to do it on a state-by-state level.
Yeah.
Because that's also, I mean, you hear so often about different youth clubs where they're driving past each other, going to a tournament on one side of the country to the other side of the country. It doesn't really make sense until you get to the top levels. And I know that there is a lot more, at least in my area here in Illinois, there are systems of promotion and relegation at the youth level, but it's all disconnected, right? So I do think that the insight on that, I do think that there's a lot there. And quite frankly, when it comes to U.S. soccer and the AGM and making these changes down the line, it's going to be 40% of the vote is in the state associations. It's a huge voting block that, you know, they have to start moving in the direction culturally themselves in order to kind of say, okay, now we want it more on a national level.
Yeah. I think too, the other thing is it's very niche-ish, right? Like the AGM and the folks who like they're very territorial about their thing, right? Like whatever that might be. It's my observation of watching these happen. And this also goes into, we just empowered the state associations to take control back of the leagues and all that stuff. So long as there's certain guidelines, they take control financially as well, that have gone away from them with the founding of US Club Soccer and all these different entities that sort of are taking these kids and, you know, oh, today, you know, in my world, hey, you got to drive down to Maryland for 2 days because you're going to play on Saturday and Sunday, some Maryland team. Why, we have a club 15 minutes from us on a turf field. We could be playing. Like, why don't we do that? And so I think that, to me, I would gladly participate in any discussions around that, because I do think that's again, from a cultural standpoint, which is my big thing. How do you get to that end state? You start. That's one mechanism, I think, is you start there. I think there's things that Major League Soccer could have fun with, but I don't think they would. But
and I think it's an interesting point to kind of start to kind of work towards the wrapping of the at least today for today's conversation. This could go on for at least a few more episodes. We'll see how it goes. But I think the youth soccer vehicle that we're kind of suggesting, right, is very interesting. Let's be hypothetical a little bit and say that it is successful on any level, right? Maybe they prove out a certain level of success within a specific state, and they'd like to find a way to mimic the model and see if there's a way to have multiple estates adopt it so that there is a real framework that maybe someday can scale into professionals utilizing it. At that point, right, if we're able to scale this thing up, work its way up through the youth ranks and have a full-fledged pro-rel system that we can learn a lot from, potentially implement at a higher level, should we do that at a higher level, right? Does it make sense with how the infrastructure is currently laid out across the American soccer pyramid to then entertain the idea of disrupting it? I'll start with you, Brian.
Well, I think that's really interesting. And I think that's so our organization, we want to create a 50-state model where we have chapters in every state. Now, thinking about the big picture and the big national pyramid, but also working on the individual states. And it's like, how can we get clubs in our state to adopt these universal principles of sporting merit, solidarity, promotion, and relegation, and be moving on that direction on the local level? I think that that's a huge part of it. And then working upwards from there to the AGM and making some of those national policy changes. A lot of times when you have reform movement, the change happens on the local level before it happens on a national level. And that's something that we want to be fostering with our organization, is to get like-minded people together, thinking about, in our local universes, how do we move towards the bigger vision, but here on the local level. And so I think that's definitely very much one of the things that's going to be important for us as an organization, to help foster that kind of conversation, adopting best practices from different parts of the state where some of those ideas might be or more well established than other areas, and working towards that big picture. So I think it's definitely something that I mean, like the way that you said that FIFA seems too big, that CONCACAF seems too big, and sometimes U.S. soccer seems like too big of a problem to tackle. Mm-hmm. Let's start working in our local level, and even if it's something as simple like ultra local, here's a park by my house where it's a grass field. Can I get a couple of soccer goals? Can I get the local park district to put a couple soccer goals in here to show a little bit of solidarity with my community? I did that here at the park.
Fantastic, by the way. I
Yeah,
still look at I get goosebumps. I'm getting goosebumps now. Like I love
yeah,
that.
and like I saw a culture transformation in my neighborhood by something that really took me about 15 minutes of effort to go from nothing to seeing 5 kids playing soccer, 10 kids playing soccer, 20 kids playing. It's a pickup game on a full-size field here right in my backyard almost. And to see that, so like these little small changes, I think can help us ignite our culture. And so that's what we want to do, is we want to be fostering. Yeah, we love to talk on Twitter about promotion and relegation with Major League Soccer and solidarity and adopting the global standards. But there is stuff that you and I can do today to start transforming culture in our own backyards. And hopefully that starts to snowball and build and build. And I think one day we can have just as a dominant men's program as we do a women's program in the United States. And we can have a culture where soccer is on the top of people's minds and communities all across America because of the changes that we make starting in our own local backyards.
Yeah, I love that, Brian. Paul, any kind of closing remarks to that effect, and more importantly, just the broader conversation that we've had?
No, like I said, I think we probably agree on a lot more than what we disagree on. I think where we disagree, or where I don't want to say disagreement, where I just struggle with is just sort of how do you actually do it, right? Like how do you functionally make things happen in a way, and right? Because again, I always go back. I was around in the dark ages, right, where there was nothing, and that's the worst place for us to get to, and I want to avoid that. So. But yeah, so like I said, I think it's a great discussion to have. I wish more of this happened. Like we could talk this through, not because, right, like the disagreement part, like it's, hey, we're doing a crossfire of soccer. No, it's more like these are real fundamental questions and issues that nobody talks about because, again, Brian, I exclude you, but a large majority of people on one side or the other are on one side or the other, and the other side are the bad guys, and you know, and so you don't really talk. And so I love this. Like we should keep doing this, right? Like
this feels like a part one, Jose.
It does feel like a part one. It does feel like a part one. Yeah, look, I couldn't agree more, Paul. I think, you know, I think it all starts with this. That's kind of why I want to do these conversations, right? Is at the end of the day, Twitter has, and the timeline, social media in general has this crazy innate ability to create echo chambers where other opinions from the outside are not welcomed in, and you're not able to have those detailed discussions. And it's the only way change, positively or negatively, or growth for that matter, ever happens. The only way it ever happens is if you are able to entertain the other side. And frankly, I think it makes both of you gentlemen, it makes your point stronger, right? Like if you can hear the other side of the argument and debate it well and understand 100%. That, hey, I hear what you're talking about, but there's another point you may not be seeing. That's the beauty of all of this. And that's why I love where this discussion has gone today. I think it feels like a part one, Brian. I tend to agree with you. We'll see how it all nets out in the comments down below. If you got to this part of the episode, you tuned in, we thank you so much for doing so. Let us know down below what we missed. I think if there are any questions specifically that you'd like for us to hone in on in the next iteration of this series, I'm more than happy to kind of throw those in and make sure that we get to them. But I also have a strong feeling that if we got to every question today, we'd be here for hours on end. So with all of this said, again, Brian, Paul, thank you both so much for joining today. We'll get you guys back on the show very soon to continue this conversation. I got a feeling there's more to that youth soccer point that we really need to dig into.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, very interesting. Really and even at a cultural level, there are things there that are distinctly different from the professional side of the game. Look, again, gentlemen, Brian, Paul, thank you so much. From everybody here at Box to Box and GOLZtv, my name's Jose. We'll catch you guys next time.